Hi, this is Rachel from Karefree Krafting. Tonight we're going to take all of these bright batiks and turn them into a quick quilt. It works up pretty fast and it grows exponentially. I don't know why, but my son wanted to name this quilt the Puffball quilt, so let's start cutting these out. This is our background color. We will need the most of this. This is cut into various squares, and then we need a couple 2.5-inch strips. The rule with batiks is that if you can't tell what the right side or wrong side is, there is no right side or wrong side. Next, we'll cut the bigger squares. You'll have 8 colored fabrics, and some of them are cut into some pretty big squares. When you cut this out, you end up with a piece in the middle that's about that big. And so we'll cut the 2 7/8 squares from this. So for colors 1 and 2, we end up with the 2 each of the 16 7/8 squares. For colors 3 and 4, they get a bit smaller. We have 2 each 8 7/8 squares. Colors 5 and 6 get smaller and smaller. These are 4 7/8 inch squares. For colors 7 and 8, they've gotten even smaller. We need 4 each instead of 2. We need 4 each for a central motif, and then the small squares. But on this level, they're all the same size. It's all 2 7/8. So we will set aside the small squares for now. Those come in later. And let's get to work turning these into half square triangles. Our background fabric is cut out in a similar fashion. Some squares are 16 7/8 and some are 16 1/2. I would recommend labeling these. I've used little stickers just to keep them straight because the sizes are very similar and it can be hard to tell the difference. Then you have 8 7/8 and 8 1/2. You have 4 7/8 and 4 1/2. But then you have a lot of 2 7/8 squares and 2.5-inch squares, and you can see how I've organized those. So the next thing we have to do is separate these. Anything ending in 7/8 is going to be part of our star. Anything ending in half is going to be our background. With the exception of the very central star, every colored square will get matched up with the background square of the same size. Mark a line down the center and then sew a 1/4 inch from the line on either side. We will then cut this line and have a bunch of half square triangles. If you noticed on your cutting directions, when you get to fabric 7 and 8, you actually need 4 of each rather than 2. So 2 of each color will get paired up with the background as we've been doing. And you see I've got the line drawn. We're going to make half square triangles as we've been doing. But then your very center is made of half square triangles made of fabrics 7 and 8. Now we've sewed all of these together on either side of the line we drew. And as you can see, they're getting bigger and bigger until we get to the biggest one. So now we're going to cut on this line we drew, and we'll iron these all flat, and then I'll show you how to put this together. Here are all of our half square triangles trimmed, pressed, and ready to go. Now we will bring in the background squares. So we only need 4 of the 2 1/2, leave the rest in the bag. And then we have 4 1/2, we have 8 1/2, and we have 16 1/2, and I'll leave those folded. Now that these are half square triangles, they measure the same as the background. This one that started out as 4 7/8 now measures 4 1/2. For the central square, we'll take these half square triangles that are colors 7 and 8, and we need to arrange these into a pinwheel. Then we'll take these other ones that are two-tone and we will make star points out of them. And then these plain background squares are the corners. So here's our central star all pressed nice and flat. The next part is where we build the second row, and it is with the next size up, the 4.5. And then of course these 4.5 inch squares of background fabric will go in the corners. Then we'll sew these two pieces to the center. Now that we have all these sewn together, we'll sew them to the main block. And just remember how we put that together, because from here on out, it's going to grow too fast to lay it out. We're just going to have to remember that we get the two half square triangles to go on the sides, and then solid block, half square triangle, and solid block to go along the top and bottom. Next we have these. These are the 8.5 inch blocks, and they'll go like this with the solid 8.5 inch block in the corners. And here is our quilt top with all but the last row put on, and it's now bigger than my table, so we'll just roll that up. The last row goes on the same as the rows before it. With each row, this quilt doubles in size. Now that we've got the central motif done, it's 64 inches by 64 inches, which doesn't really fit on this table. So I'll show you the entire quilt after we do this last part. Now we bring in the remaining 64 background squares, and all of these other 2 7/8 inch squares that we cut from each color. Each star takes 8 of these, 4 in each color. So what we need to do is decide how we're going to do this. So after much sorting, now we have 16 unique combinations. Now we need 4 each of the background squares, measuring 2 7/8. I'll use these clips to keep everything together. I won't add the 2.5 inch square until I've got these sewn into half square triangles, because they're so close in size I don't want to get them mixed up. In seeing that, you might almost think I'm an organized person. So we'll make these stars one at a time. First thing we need to do is draw a diagonal line on the back of each of these background squares. Then 2 of these will get paired up with the yellow, and 2 will get paired up with the multicolored batik. And then we'll have 2 that are paired up like this. So we'll need a line on the back of the yellow. Now that we have all this done, we'll bring in our 2.5 inch squares, and then just like with our central star, we'll start out with the half square triangle made of 2 batiks and arrange it into a pinwheel. And then we'll build points. Then we'll put these in the corners. And we'll sew this all together. We have all of our small blocks done. There are 16 of these, and each one will be different. You may have chosen to make some of them the same or make them in pairs. I wanted random coloring and no 2 blocks the same. So the next thing we're going to do is take these and sew them into 2 rows of 8. And then the 2 rows of 8 will get a border along one side from these 2.5 inch strips. And then we'll sew this to our central motif. Now that we have 2 rows of 8 stars, and we have the 2.5-inch strip along one side only. We're going to attach to our central motif, and this is a big square. Just pick a side, any side, and attach this row like this, and then do the same thing on the opposite side. It will leave some raw edges along the bottom of the stars and along the side, but we're going to put a border on this so it will look balanced. Here is our finished quilt. It started out as this little pinwheel 4-patch, and then we added another row to make this 8-point star. Then we added another row to make an even bigger star. Another row. Then we added our biggest row yet and ended up with a star that is 64 inches by 64 inches. Then we added our top row of stars, and we added our bottom row of stars to get this bright finished quilt. Thanks for watching. If you like this pattern, you can find it on carefreekrafting.com. There's a link down in the description box. Please like, share, and subscribe, and have a good day.